Hi, everybody. This is Jackie from the Let's Talk TEFL podcast. So, we have been on a brief hiatus this past year, but I am back and I plan to do regular podcast episodes starting this summer and then, hopefully just continuing on. And we have a few different guests in the works. So, please stay tuned and check in. And of course, give this podcast a subscribe or a review wherever you listen to it. And I'd really appreciate that. So today I'm going to talk about a topic. I'm going to do a solo episode and talk about a topic that I haven't discussed before. And that is whether or not to allow phones in the classroom. So I'll talk specifically about a language learning classroom, such as an ESL or EFL class, or maybe you teach another language. First, I'll talk about the reasons to potentially allow phones, and then the reasons to potentially not allow phones. And then I will offer some maybe solutions or kind of a middle ground that I generally will use in my own classrooms. Okay, so first, let's get into the reasons why you might allow phones in the classroom. So the first thing is emergency communication. So if parents or whoever are trying to get a hold of their children, it's probably the fastest and easiest way to do that. However, if you're teaching children, parents can always just contact the school, the principal, secretaries, whoever, and they can get a hold of the kids. For adults, maybe the class is an hour long. The students will check their phones after the class anyway, so I don't really see this as the biggest pro, but it's the one that other people always list when they're talking about this topic. So I thought I would mention it here. I don't actually think it's a very strong reason. All right, the second reason to use them is for things like polls and quizzes. So it can kind of be fun if you want to find out what your students think about a certain topic, or have them do a little quiz of some kind. They can just pull out their phones and then just kind of put their answers in, and then you can quickly get some stats. There's a bunch of different programs and apps and whatever that will do this. I have done this a couple times in my classes, and I mean, it's kind of gimmicky, a little bit fun, but I honestly just kind of prefer the old school way. Like if we're doing a debate or something like that, just kind of straight up asking students, put up your hand if you agree, put up your hand if you disagree, or even do kind of the four corners thing. If you strongly agree, go to this side of the classroom, strongly disagree, go to this other side. And then the two other corners are kind of like the middle ground people. So there's ways to do this without using phones, and that's kind of my preference. It just ends up being faster and kind of easier in the end. Something that I do really like using phones for is having students look up information. This is especially true for something like task-based learning. So, for example, sometimes I'll do an activity where when I was in South Korea, I would tell my students, my parents are planning a 2-week trip to Korea, and here's some of their hobbies and interests and how much they like to walk. They don't really like spicy food, etc. And then I'd put students into small groups, and they had to plan a sample itinerary or sample vacation for my parents. So in that case, students might have to look up some information on their phones, and I would let them use their phones for that purpose. Or maybe there was a specific vocabulary word, they had an idea of something, maybe like a cultural relic or something that they wanted my parents to see, but they didn't know the name in English. So in that case, phones can be very, very useful, especially for task-based learning. Another reason is that the phone is super good at acting as kind of just a dictionary or a translator. So just a very quick way if someone is searching for a word or something and doesn't quite know it. And then another way is pronunciation. So if students have a word that they encounter during reading or in the textbook or something and they don't know how to pronounce it, they can kind of just go to a dictionary app or a dictionary site, and then they can find out the pronunciation of it. And the final reason that I have here is for using phones in the classroom is that they are good for kind of doing gamification of the classroom. So there's programs like Kahoot, Quizlet, etc. There's lots more out there that can kind of turn learning into a kind of game experience. And it can be quite fun, depending on kind of the age of your students and kind of where they're at, their motivation levels. if your students are very low level and sometimes very lowly motivated, I mean, this kind of can work as kind of a last ditch resort to try to just create some energy and fun and excitement in the classroom. So I think basically those are my main reasons why I would consider using phones in the classroom. So let's get into reasons why you might not want to use phones in the classroom. Number one is that students are already on their phones all the time. There's so many studies out there that show screens and devices, especially for younger learners whose brains aren't fully developed, are not necessarily a good thing. I think for adults as well, being on their phone or tablet or whatever all the time is also not necessarily a good thing for people's mental health, etc. So I like having my classroom as kind of a break from that. And that's not to say that I don't show like little video clips or we do podcasts sometimes, that kind of thing. I certainly do make use of those things in my classroom. But I don't want to have my students or me to be on screens literally the whole hour, the whole hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever my classroom length is. I think it can kind of just be a good break from that. And so the second reason not to use phones is that students can kind of over rely on their translators or their dictionaries. So for example, if a student is doing a reading and they come across a word that they think might be important, but they don't know what it is, the first instinct is just to quickly grab the phone and then to look it up. And it can be helpful, of course, the student will know what that word means after that. However, I'm not sure it's necessarily the most helpful thing. I try to teach my students, for example, in that situation of a reading, to use context to try to guess or figure out what that word might mean based on the surrounding words or the sentence, that kind of thing. That is actually teaching a valuable reading skill, and kind of using a phone as a crutch is kind of skipping over that step. Another alternative is that students can ask a friend what that word means, and the friend and them can kind of figure it out, and it might make that situation or that word more memorable if a friend is the one that tells you. Another thing I like is that I tell students to ask me what it means. And so if a student says, like, what is this ABC word in English or whatever, blah, 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 word in English, what does this word mean? I don't necessarily know the Korean word or the Mandarin word or whatever, of course, for that. But I can give students maybe some hints or some clues or another kind of similar English word. This is a valuable learning experience. And if a student just quickly grabs their phone to find out, they kind of skip over that kind of little like vocabulary challenge. So similar words or having to like understand an explanation or something like that. So yeah, I don't want students relying on their translators all the time. This just does nothing to build fluency in terms of reading, and it doesn't really help with anything, really. I think students will just quickly look up the word, oh, it means this, and then just forget it. It's not like they're actually learning that vocabulary word. Another reasons to not allow phones is equity issues. So in many countries, all students would have a smartphone. So this isn't a huge deal in countries where you're in that situation. However, for places where not everyone might have a cell phone, then certainly I would not want to do activities where some students would feel left out. And also for younger learners, some parents may allow their kids to have cell phones, some may not. So that's also kind of an equity issue, more related to parents and what their preferences are. So for me, it's kind of all or nothing. If all the students have a cell phone, then I would consider using them in the classroom. But if everyone doesn't have a cell phone, then certainly I would not, unless it's some like, say, group activity, like task-based learning, or maybe they're doing like a photo scavenger hunt or something where they might need one person to look up something or one person to take pictures out of a group of, say, 4 people. In that case, it's fine, and I don't worry about it. But if all students need their own personal cell phone connected to data, I tend not to like love that situation, because what if the one person can't afford data and just goes on Wi-Fi and they don't have Wi-Fi in that classroom? There's so many reasons why I don't love this. The next reason why I might not use cell phones in the classroom is that we all experience this, the notifications. So, you're looking up something, maybe you're looking up a word when you're doing your reading or something like that, or you're looking up some information. Suddenly, maybe your boyfriend or girlfriend is sending you like a cute text message, or like some news thing about your favorite team. Maybe they just like made a trade and you want to check out what that is, etc., etc. There's so many reasons to kind of go down a rabbit hole on your cell phone and do something other than the intended educational thing. So they're hard to resist. Companies make these kinds of things addictive on purpose. And so I don't, how to say this? I don't like have the best, I myself am an easy target when notifications pop up. So I don't have higher expectations for my students in terms of being able to resist it than I do for myself. I know for myself, I find that difficult. And I'm sure most of my students are similar to me. And the final reason that I have to not use cell phones is that learning a language can sometimes just be a bit of a slog. I mean, when you're learning kind of some new grammar rules, or you're working on like reading fluency, or you're studying vocabulary, it's a bit of a slog, and it's not always like fun or exciting or a game. Sometimes it can be difficult, and if everything is always kind of a game and fun with cell phones, and it kind of takes away that part of it. And I'm not saying I try to make my classes boring or a slog. Of course I don't. Of course I try to make them engaging and interesting and relevant for my students. But I do realize that sometimes learning languages is hard work. And in my classroom, I expect my students to work hard and to put a good effort into improving their English skills. And this doesn't always happen with a phone in your hand. There's sometimes where you just have to do things without a phone that are hard and difficult, but you just have to put your entire focus into it. Those are my reasons to possibly use a cell phone, and then reasons to not use a cell phone. So hopefully I presented kind of a balanced approach. And now I'm going to get into kind of solutions. So what I actually do in my own classrooms. So generally I tell my students, put your phones away. I just say, I don't want to see them on your desk. And if they're in their pockets or their bags or like under their notebooks or whatever, I don't really care. I just say, I don't want to see them just with your screen up and you on your phone, basically. I kind of just, I make that a classroom rule, actually, just no phones, unless there is a very specific task or something that students can use them for. And then I'll explicitly tell them, you can use your phone for this if you want. So for example, just for fun, I have taught university students the most in the past. So I would do a photo scavenger hunt around campus. So I would say like, find an example of something green or something very big or etc. And I put students into groups, and then one student would be in charge of taking the pictures for their group, the 20 or 25 things or whatever on the list. So in that case, someone needs to use a cell phone. They could use their phones to do some research, maybe like figure out a place to go, etc. And another example that I previously mentioned is doing some research for a task-based project, such as like somewhere to go on vacation in Korea or wherever. Sometimes if we're doing a reading exercise and I know that there's lots of words that maybe students won't have encountered before, I'll say, you can use your cell phone if you'd like for this. Or you can ask me, or you can ask your friend, what this word means. So, and once in a while I'll do like a quiz or something like that just for fun, or a little like game to mix it up. Not that often though, but so there are explicit situations and times when I do let students use their phones, and however, this isn't that often. Probably like in, say, once every 2 or 3 classes, there would be a small block of time when students could use their phones. But I do go entire classes without really having activities or anything that would require students to use a phone. And one other situation is if like students are asking me, what does this word mean? And I explain and they like still have a confused look in their eyes. And sometimes I'll say, just look it up on your phone. It's fine. Just like, I'm not doing a good job of explaining it to you. And they just look it up. Oh, okay, great. So in that situation, if there's something that I don't know or that I can't explain well, and it would just be simpler and easier for the student just to look it up in their first language, that's also a situation when I would just say, yeah, just go ahead, look on your phone. That's no problem. I think that's all. That's all that I have for phones in the language learning classroom, whether or not you should use them. So it's totally up to you, of course. And but I hope you've appreciated my thoughts about it. So yeah, please subscribe to this podcast and leave a rating or review, and I would really appreciate that. You can find all the podcast episodes and information on eslactivity.org/podcast. And you can also find all the activities and games and resources you need for teaching English there as well. And yeah, I think that's it from me, and I will catch you next time.